This is our student learning podcast experience. Essentially, it's a podcast about a podcast, a space where we explore teaching and research possibilities. Welcome to our first episode of Student Learning Podcast Experience. All right, I'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we meet on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Giving acknowledgement even in this space as it is a step towards reconciliation, recognizing that it is only one small step towards equity and decolonization. Shedding light on the land acknowledgement, I reference one of my recent guest lecturers, Erica Chung, a PhD candidate in the Joint Communication and Culture program at Toronto Metropolitan University. The way she had started her fantastic presentation provided us, the audience, a source, native-land.ca. Native Land is an app to gain visual awareness to the Indigenous territories, treaties, and languages. They provide mapping and education for further inquiry that goes beyond the colonial ways. She also gave a link to yellowheadinstitute.org if you want to read more about truth and reconciliation. Thanks, Erica, for the great lecture and for providing us with such meaningful resources. I felt, since I'm investigating everything podcast, Indigenous new media came up at the University of British Columbia. Quote, driven by the desire of Indigenous peoples to share their stories on a global scale and assume agency over their representation, Indigenous podcasts have emerged as a tool to decolonize the airwaves, unquote. It is these traditional practices of storytelling and story listening that not only extend voice, but make use of the archival practice in digital form. For those interested in tuning into Indigenous podcasts, Free Crees in a Pod, Media Indigena, and Recording Relations are additional ways to intimately connect with Indigenous relations and culture perspectives. Knowledge mobilization through podcasts. When I started researching podcasting, I thought a good starting point would be to investigate and understand the fundamentals of podcast curation and development. On the research side of things, I did have a framework put in place. Let me break it down. I asked myself, what are things to consider when planning a podcast? When, or specifically, where is podcast recording ideal? And how do I go about audio transcription? So today we'll be investigating the elements of podcasting. I'll be playing footage from previous recorded interviews taking place in person at the Lyons New Media Center and virtually on Zoom. First, we begin by tuning into podcast interview snips with Veronica Litt. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Hello, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So my name is Veronica Litt. I use she, her pronouns. I work at the Sherman Center for Digital Scholarship, which is located in Mills Library within McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. As Digital Scholarship Coordinator, I wear a few hats. I handle administration, communications, promotions, and every now and again I get to support digital scholarship projects that I find interesting, including running workshops on podcasting, which is why I am the guest.
Not using specific names or course titles, do you have students or faculty staff that come to you with regards to podcasting and audio support?
Yeah, so I've actually only been in this role for 1 year, and I started amplifying the podcasting element, which was not actually a requirement in the job. It was just sort of something within the realm of digital scholarship that I happened to have a facility with. So it was really lovely to collaborate with a professor in the communication studies department we hosted a little presentation for their class and talked the students through a very basic workflow for building a podcast. And we've hosted one session on podcasting that was attended mostly by humanities and social sciences scholars. And we have another podcasting bootcamp event happening in, about 3 weeks. So coming up fast. And I think it'll be interesting to call the data and see what departments those attendees are from, because I'm hoping we can reach out to scientists, because I think, as we'll discuss, I'm sure, one of the things that podcasting can do so effectively is translate research, high-level academic research, for a public audience and bring relevance to that research.
Yes, definitely. That boot camp sounds so interesting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Please do.
Mm-hmm. So, what would your dream podcast or course look like?
What are the parameters of the course? I was one of those people where if someone was like, you can write your essay on anything, I'd be like, no, I need boundaries. I'm too scared.
You need limitations.
I really do. Well, I have a background in 18th century literature about women and gender studies and book history. So that, I guess, is a wheelhouse that I feel comfortable in. So if I were to teach a course and have a podcasting element, one thing that might be interesting would be trying to tackle the challenge of podcasting's nature as an audio medium, because I really love podcasting for its public scholarship capacities. It can really get research out of the ivory tower, and I think that's something that we all need to be making sure we're doing, and something that institutions at large need to make sure they're making a priority and backing up with tangible funding, so that professors have the time and resources to be writing op-eds and creating public scholarship. But one of the limitations of podcasting is that it's an audio medium. So if you are working in a visual field like art or book history, where you're handling rare books, a podcast can be a challenging way to spread that message. And yet podcasts are so popular that it seems foolish not to at least try. So I think that would be a generative challenge, to try to work through the trouble of maybe podcasting's limitations based on certain fields and topics with the students, and see what we come up with together, because I think learning is best when it's collaborative.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the challenges that visual arts may hold with podcasting, and tackle that.
I did listen to a podcast about fine art in the art world. It was hosted by one of the girls on Broad City, and it was co-sponsored by the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And they managed to do it with, I think, very good writing, very expressive, evocative writing. But I mean, it was an issue that they're describing this art, and I had to be Googling it to see it. So just things to keep in mind.
The visual limitations are distinct barriers to consider. Translating the imagery is a craft on its own. To exemplify, I reference a source of the Lion King audio description, linked from YouTube Jane Doe.
Hundreds of animals gather at the bottom of Pride Rock, a tall, flat ledge that towers over the rest of the savannah. Zazu, a small blue bird with a large beak, flaps to the ledge. He bows to Mufasa, a powerful, dignified lion with a thick red mane. Rafiki, an elderly baboon with white hair, slowly climbs up to the ledge and hugs Mufasa warmly. They walk back to a cave where Mufasa's wife, Sarabi, cuddles a tiny lion cub in her paws.
If we were to have a lecture content available for podcasts, how could you see that working, or is it feasible?
I think it's very feasible. I think people assume podcasting is harder than it is. I don't want to undersell it. It is a skill set you have to cultivate and hone. However, you can learn. I taught myself, and lots of people teach themselves. And there are so many excellent resources just available for free on the internet. So I am happy that I am able to say, like, you can do it. I promise. It's really okay. It's not that hard. There are so many YouTube tutorials available. In terms of teaching faculty, I know it's possible because I do it, which is part of my job that I really enjoy. Elaine and I break down the podcasting process into 6 steps, which are planning your show, followed by recording your show, editing your show, coming up with a brand and then promoting your show, hosting your show, and then maintaining your show. And the maintenance phase it's like a learning opportunity that never ends, because as you maintain your show, you refine all the other parts of the workflow and you realize what works in each section and what areas you want to let go of and move ahead on. So podcasting is an eternal learning process, and that's one of the things that makes it really exciting. The word for this in the academy is iterative, but basically that means that you learn it as you do it, and you're constantly in a process of merging between these moments of reflecting and doing. So it's just a lovely thing about it. So that's how we teach people, and I hope it's effective. We have gotten feedback that is nice, and, you know, it's only 6 steps. They can be broken down, and podcasting is very attainable. I think if you have a phone or computer, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it.
I'm scared.
Imagine someone came up to you and said, I've tried podcasting and I've failed. How would you respond to this?
I would tell them something I tell myself a lot, which is like, everything you do out of love and passion is embarrassing. Everything's embarrassing. Everything is cringe. You just need to embrace it. And also, you don't get good at something overnight. You get good at something by doing it and maybe not doing it perfectly. The first podcast I made, I have not listened to in years, even though I love that project. It was a feminist podcast about movies called Citizen Jane. It was a very silly project that myself and 2 friends from grad school did together because we missed being in classes. We were in the phase of the PhD where everyone is like deeply sad and alone in like their basement apartments in Toronto. And we were like, oh, I want to talk about culture and some kind of enjoyable text with people that are smart and enjoyable to talk to. And so we made this podcast, and the audio quality was heinous because we didn't know what we were doing. And the editing was an exciting disaster. But I look back on that project really fondly, and it also meant that when I was ready to sort of level up my podcast skills for a position I held at a website, I made a podcast called Yesterday's News that was a sort of fun and irreverent spin on history. Mm-hmm. And when I was pitching that to my bosses, I was able to say, I have made a show. And I think thankfully they didn't actually listen to it because they let me go ahead. But all to say, you know, even if you try something once and it doesn't go well, like, don't blame yourself. Maybe you didn't have the best teacher at the time. Maybe you needed to learn in a different way. Maybe you just needed a little more time to hone your skills. Like, nothing happens overnight. And if you're interested, the resources are there. And if you're at McMaster, you can come chat with me. I'm very friendly. I'm very happy to help. I'm very, very friendly. Like a golden retriever. So, yeah, don't be discouraged. Practice makes a little better each time. I like that way of thinking about it.
Yeah, because you're just constantly learning.
Yeah, and then the other thing I guess I'd say is that every podcast has an ideal audience. So no show is going to be beloved by everybody. But if your show really connects with a community of people, they will forgive subpar sound quality. I listen to tons of shows where I'm like, oh yeah, this is deeply not made by Radiolab or This American Life. This is made by 2 lovely people in their closets trying their best. And that is just fine because the content is interesting to me. And I think that, you know, people are kinder than you think, especially as you go niche into a topic. You'll find people who are willing to forgive, you know, some dire microphone issues.
So what is digital scholarship?
I'm very happy to promote the Sherman Center where I work. Thank you for this platform. So the Sherman Center is kind of a very, very special place. We are like a library, but instead of books, we have a staff of 10 enthusiastic experts in various fields of digital scholarship, including digital humanities, data analysis and visualization, research data management, textual analysis, statistical analysis, coding, website building, etc. We have 10 people who are available for consultations and available to support scholars as they work on projects, but also community members. We have helped a local community organization get a platform for hate crime reporting, a way for racialized people in the city to be able to report a hate crime without going to police. That's a project that I found very fulfilling to be even a very, very small part of. And we collaborated on some machine learning workshops for a community organization here in Hamilton that supports women and non-binary people reskilling to enter the tech industry. So effectively, all I mean to say is that if you are interested in anything related to digital scholarship, and digital scholarship is a very broad and multifaceted and constantly evolving domain that includes everything, maybe most pertinent to listeners of this show, public scholarship projects that use digital tools, things like podcasting, digital exhibits, websites, online journals. We are able to help you. We can help you find the right software. We can help you consider ethics and privacy considerations as you're doing these projects. And we can also give you access to certain things like workstations and 3D printers and things like this. So basically, the Sherman Center is a support hub for people who want to do digital scholarship, and we're very much around. So please email us at scds@mcmaster.ca, and maybe we can work together.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the benefits of podcasting with your thoughts around knowledge mobilization?
One of the things that is most impactful about podcasting as a medium for scholarship is that it again collapses that wall between researchers and the public. Universities are theoretically public institutions. They should be helping the public. Our knowledge does us no good if we publish it in a journal and 2 people read it, And I think this is something that is a little contested in the field. I know not all scholarship needs to have utility, because then we get into this thing of are we defining utility in terms of does it matter in a deeply capitalist hellscape? And I don't want that. Art for art's sake matters, etc. And yet, if we can use our skills as researchers, analysts, and communicators to help the communities that we live in, then isn't that a good thing?
Distribute our knowledge. Make a difference.
Reciprocation.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we interview Lyons Media Center, Elaine Westenhaver.
Hi, yes. So thanks for having me here. I work in the library, the Mills Library at McMaster University. I'm in the Media Center, and our formal name is Lyons New Media Center. My role is a digital media specialist, and I support the teaching and learning aspects of the Media Center, anything from assisting students, staff, and faculty with their media projects, running workshops in the center on various topics like audio editing, video production, graphic design, and sometimes I'm even asked to help in classes if students are assigned assignments such as creating a podcast like this or creating a poster. I'll give them some guidance and tell them about what services we have here to help them get started. Trend of using podcasts.
Welcome to the podcast. Today I'm going to talk about a phenomenon that is especially pervasive in Florida.
You're listening to the Creative Contributions Podcast.
In the academic world.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our podcast. I'm Lana.
And I'm Riley.
And we're going to be discussing a topic that is related to the Civil War.
Should Confederate statues be removed or not?
Trend of using podcasts in the academic world. As my role, I need to support this kind of work being done at the university. So I guess my interest just came from a demand, and I'm more so involved in the post-production aspect of podcasting, like the audio editing part. even the production part, like the actual recording, like how to set up your mic properly, how to use all the fancy knobs. But yeah, I don't have much experience or anything like that with the whole podcast as like a production as a whole, like the hosting and all that stuff. It's just my interest comes from just background knowledge of audio production. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And you are helpful, very helpful, especially to me. I did come to you for advice with recording and editing, and you helped me set up today, which was fantastic for our podcast. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So what is the typical demographic that comes to your center? Is it more faculty? Is it more staff, students?
So yeah, I've gone into classrooms, but with staff, it's mostly been researchers who come to me because they're interested in getting their research out there, as you know. Yeah, so I more so, yeah, I see the huge potential of the podcasting and the research, knowledge, mobilization, and dissemination world. Yeah, really getting their technical kind of language broadcasted to a more general audience. Researchers exploring topics in Indigenous communities have been using podcasting to mobilize that knowledge. Kind of grassroots initiatives too.
Community-based research.
Community-based of groups who are using podcasting as like to get their voice. A voice that's been traditionally, unfortunately, kind of not been lifted as much, and they're really utilizing this medium to expand their reach.
When asking, what is your dream podcast sound like? Elaine answers,
my dream podcast.
What reels you in?
Oh, it's hard because like I work in like a university, so I feel like my answer should be like academic.
It doesn't have to be. No.
Honestly, I think I love hearing about people's unique finds at like thrift stores and antique malls.
Yeah.
So like I think that would be interesting to just tune into like a little story time of, oh, I went to, Goodwill the other day and I found this awesome, I don't know, really old silver platter or something like that. Like I think that would be.
It's informative. It's great. No, it's entertainment, right?
Yeah.
So it's a form of entertainment and it's educational at the same time.
Right.
So you're finding out where to get these pieces if you ever needed to see.
Yeah. And I think also, now that you mention that, I think it would be really great if they could explain why this piece is historical or like why it's such a hidden gem. Like, why was it so amazing that they found it? I don't know, maybe some famous designer created this like mid-century mug,
like a hidden story behind it.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
Mm-hmm. So my follow-up question to that is, what do you think a lecture or educational podcast could have in the same sort of appeal? So with taking that podcast, how would we incorporate that into a lecture?
Yeah, something that sounds casual, like something that like people won't fall asleep to. I don't know, like if you think of taking a lecture and then making it into a podcast, you might think like it might sound kind of dry.
Yeah.
So I think it really has to be speaking the same language as whoever's listening, students or whoever's listening, really having good, I don't know, keeping it relevant, that people, as they're listening, kind of like people are like, oh, yeah.
So making that connection,
yeah,
perhaps?
Like, oh, I've kind of experienced that, or hey, that happened to me the other day, or something, like keeping it really conversational tone instead of being spoken at kind of thing. Even though you're not having a conversation with the person you're listening to in a podcast, but I think it's just all about tone and making it a little bit more fun for people to hear.
Yeah, for sure. You want to listen to something more, I guess, engaging.
Yeah.
More with something with excitement, nothing that's too dry or make you fall asleep.
Yeah, because I think people people choose a podcast based on their interests. So if you're using a podcast in a course, like it'd have to be like you want everyone to be interested in the topic. It's a personal kind of thing. I read this thing, or maybe it was like some random TED talk. I listened to. I hope it's okay. I'm going on a little tangent here.
No, go for it.
They kind of created this analogy of like, I guess it would be a medium. The closeness that you interact with it, kind of, it like your physical proximity to it, the more personal it is. Like you watch a show on TV, it's a little further away from you than maybe a laptop. And then on laptop, you're watching like YouTube, like things that are a little bit more personal choice. And then you go from laptop to earbuds, and that's like the podcast, and that's like super close in your ear. It's a really personal kind of choice of what you want to listen to, like in your ears, like no one else can hear it. It's just you and the podcast. It could be like really niche. I feel like the like more specific it is, the more niche it is, the better it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that really stuck with me of how we interact with these different things just keeps getting closer.
It keeps getting closer to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that.
It's not my own. I found that from somewhere. I forget where it is. I wish I could tell you who the source was, but it's not me.
I know you talked about some barriers in accessing for students, so you make things more open for them, more accessible, like using free software.
Yep.
So has any student had any issue with these, or do you find that there are any other barriers that they should consider?
Other than like software, there are really good free alternatives. So I think knowledge is honestly the biggest barrier, or just like intimidation of making a podcast. Like I think a lot of people think they need fancy spaces, fancy equipment, fancy software, and the knowledge, they think there's a big gap where they want to be in terms of knowledge on how to make a podcast. But like I don't know how this came to be, like why podcasting is seen as such a grand, like big thing to get to. Like it's pretty simple. There are really, as I mentioned, really good free software, and we have audio recording booths in the center, but they're free for people to use, and it has great equipment in it. But sometimes even getting to campus is a barrier. So people are like, "Well, I can't get to the booth. Like I'm not gonna have a good audio recording if I record from home." Well, actually, just sit in your closet with a sock over the end of your microphone or at the end of your phone. Use voice memos on your cell phone and just sit in there and record your podcast. Like you just need some room with some sort of sound dampening-ness, so a closet with all your clothes, some recording device, phone's decent because we talk on it, right, to people. We have phone calls. You can hear person okay as long as the cell phone reception is good. Yeah, and then free software, and maybe podcasting has been like romanticized. I don't know what it is. Maybe we have this idea of like these fancy elite people sitting with their fancy microphones in a fancy booth, when it's really attainable to people with their everyday items.
Yeah, I could see that. I was a little intimidated. I had a podcast for one of my assignments before, and I'm like, I don't have a mic. I don't have this. I don't have that. Okay, let's do this. I'm gonna take my phone, go in the closet, and it actually worked. So
yeah,
it was great tips.
And like during the like pandemic lockdown years, like I really had to switch my mindset because I was so privileged to have this space available to me. And I would like only promote, but like I would only mention these options. Like when someone said, "Oh, I want to do a podcast," I'm like, well, we got our booth, we got our microphone, there you go. But like when we had to work from home and our center wasn't open, I had to really shift my thoughts, try to figure out like, can people create podcasts at home? And I saw this increase. I don't know why. Maybe professors wanted their students to create things during those lockdown periods. Maybe they wanted to move away from the computer and like do something. A lot of people were creating podcasts and they're like, how can we do this from home? So there's so many innovative ways. So I had to create like a whole like guide on like how to use your cell phone, how to like get into those settings in your cell phone so that you're actually recording at like a higher quality audio and things like that, little tricks. And yeah, so definitely had to think in terms of removing those typical barriers when we didn't have access to stuff like this.
For sure. What is your favorite podcast you listen to?
I have a confession. I don't really listen to podcasts.
No!
I am like, I support people like who want to record audio and want to edit audio. I think I'd probably be one of those learners who I couldn't digest information in an audio only format. It just my brain's a bit too spacey for that. So yeah, that's my confession.
Thank you for your transparency. That's awesome. Maybe because you do that for your, like, it's your job.
Yeah.
You do it all day. You come home and you're just like, yeah, I don't want to listen anymore.
Honestly,
Maybe.
I have headphones a lot on while I'm at work. I'm staring at a computer a lot while I'm at work. I have so much digital stuff needing my attention while I'm at work. When I'm home, no way.
Yeah, you're like, get it away.
It's puzzle time. It's time to bake muffins, pet my cats, quiet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Since I had to look into transcribing for the audio and accessibility being one of our emergent themes throughout the research, I connected with Nancy Waite to provide details specific to audio transcription. In addition, she surprises me with a student perspective towards podcasting, as she is a current graduate student. Now let's transcribe.
Okay.
My name is Nancy Waite. I'm the coordinator for Library Accessibility Services. And in our department, our primary goal is to provide accessible course material for students. So that could be alternate formats of textbooks, research material. But one of the other things that we get into is captioning resources for students. Usually that's directed by the instructor. And we also produce described video, and we get into Braille, pretty much anything that the student needs within the classroom.
So my main goal to achieve today is to discover what accessibility services the McMaster Library offers for students and instructors. This includes instructors or just students with disabilities or students and instructors with English as a second language. So describe what is currently being used and how podcasts can benefit these barriers.
And main one that you're interested in from this perspective is our captioning service. So instructors can submit, and it really does need to come from the instructor. I know that we've had instances where the student has approached us and we will approach the instructor on the student's behalf, but the request itself has to come from the instructor. So on our website, we have a closed captioning and described video request form. So if if an instructor is using, like, we call it supplemental material, so it's not to caption an entire lecture. It's just the like, if it's like, hey, it's video day in class, we will caption that material. So that could come from like a National Geographic video, or it could be something from YouTube, and we will caption that video. And you're absolutely right. Captioning doesn't have to just be for accessibility reasons, though every video that's shown in class should be captioned under AODA. But there's a lot of reasons for videos to be captioned. English is a second language, learning new terminology for a complicated class. So really there's a whole host of reasons why captioning is very helpful for students. And actually that's one of the things on our website, that there's several different reasons why captioning is beneficial for students.
With all of those options available to us, how could podcasts benefit? How can we incorporate podcasting as an additional source?
Podcasts can be captioned, like a transcript can be generated from a podcast. So that's definitely a possibility. And then in the reverse, creating a podcast about these services would definitely be something that we would be interested in exploring as a learning tool. I think, just text-based learning is, one way of educating people, but I think a variety of options is definitely helpful.
Yeah, it would be very beneficial, I think, in terms of just spreading the word through word of mouth. You have the website, and even through just tuning into a podcast about it.
I think students learn in a variety of different ways. Some students learn best by reading, other students learn best by hearing, and even more learn best by both, by having that transcript and hearing the audio. And I think, you're going to reach more students by having both options available.
Personal question, do you listen to podcasts? And do you have a favorite podcast you listen to?
It sounds bad, but I don't. But I've had projects for school. I actually recently graduated. I'm working on a master's right now, and I've made podcasts for class. So it's not that I don't want to. I just, to be honest, don't have time. So yes, I would like to. Maybe after I graduate, I will have time.
On that note, with your courses that you've had, did you have any podcasts as a supplement instead of reading?
No, actually, no. We had to create them, but we didn't have any supplemental. And I would have loved that option because, they're definitely, there have been some that I've found that I'm like, hey, I would rather listen to this. I think this would be fascinating rather than this very dry, academic article that I'm not sure that I'm going to get a lot out of.
It's time constricting. Depends on the class too, I guess. And the purpose of me going forward with, this idea of an educational podcast is trying to deconstruct that article that you should be reading, or try to put it in a little bit more layman's terms, trying to grab those key concepts and apply them to real world situations and have those real conversations.
And really, isn't that the whole goal of an education, is to make it real and connect it to real life? Because, most students aren't going on to postgraduate education. They're trying to apply this degree to, their next steps in life, their work life. And how are they going to do that if they're reading an article that really is so rooted into this, to the science or the whatever it is that they're reading, that it doesn't really apply to their lives? And universities, although great for theory and building a very strong critical thinker, it really doesn't, allow that person to be connected to real world strategies. It's close to what I'm trying to think of.
So it's important to communicate and talk to each other. And what better way than a podcast?
Exactly.
I'm just selling it. No. I'll check that out.
But I think that's the thing, is that, it's the connection between the content and, other parts of life, where articles tend to be fairly dry and really focused on whatever it is that they're writing about. And, it's nice to be able to also, put on a podcast and do laundry or drive home, or, multitask and still get the content that you need, because a lot of students don't have time and may miss out on important information because they don't have time to actually read the article. So there's a lot of reasons to add a podcast to, the syllabus. And, that, time management, or not even time management, time crunch as another consideration. There's a lot, but definitely accessibility is a huge one.
All right. So what is the biggest takeaway you hope listeners to learn?
That, first of all, that captions are available, and that really giving students a variety of options really enhances their learning. Yeah, because everybody learns differently, and really that one size fits all doesn't suit everybody. And that's even without disabilities. And then when you add in we have students with disabilities in the classroom as well, that just adds to, adding in universal design. If we think about universal design and, adding in a variety of options, you're more likely to teach to, everybody than just providing just that one option.
Yes, instead of just tailoring it to the one demographic, you're adding more diversity in that sense.
Exactly.
Overall, the things to consider when planning a podcast.
Ooh, oh my gosh. I hope that you consider podcasting something that anyone can do, something attainable, and something that you don't need to get perfectly right the first time.
If you're thinking about doing a podcast, it's a lot easier than you think. If you're thinking about doing a podcast, it's a lot easier than you think. There's a lot of thinking there, but to do it, like, you'd be surprised. Don't be intimidated by it. And when there's people here to support you, like me, yeah. I think that'd be my takeaway.
There are many support staff and tools which are available at McMaster University campus. So for those of you listening, reach out to any of these wonderful individuals for any of your podcasting needs. They would be happy to help. That's all for today's episode of Student Learning Podcast Experience. Tune in to our next episode where we will unpack the student perspective.